Hello, I'm live. It's 5:30 and it's still light, so I decided to read another chapter out of Scarlet Feather. It's a book by Joan Grant. It's a farm memory book. Joan Grant was a seer. She lived between 1907 and 1989, and she was married several times, and she used to write farm memory novels or books. She was known as an author, and I don't think she was really known as a psychic and a channel for her own memories. But this novel here, or this book here, is about Piyanah and Raki. They were together from the beginning because Raki's mother died. Nobody knows who his father is. Piyanah is the daughter of a chief, the chief in which they live now, in the tribe they live now. Piyanah's mother has died, and the two children must integrate themselves into the rest of the tribe. So they're preparing now, and I have just read a chapter about Raki being in the squaw's teepee, and this one here is called The Quarry. I was always glad when Dorak said we were to practice tracking, for it meant being alone all day, which was much better than being with anyone except Raki. The boys worked in pairs, a quarry and a hunter. The quarry was given a start and had to return to the encampment at sunset. If he had been caught before then, the hunter was the winner. I preferred being the quarry, for Raki and I had always been good at hiding, and often by leaving a false trail and then climbing a tree, I would have time to forget I was supposed to be a boy and think of the future when Raki and I would no longer be apart. But when, for the first time, I was told to act as Gorky's quarry, I knew I should need every trick to keep ahead of him. For since the dive, he had always tried desperately to win when we were matched against each other. It was difficult. It was a difficult day, for there had been heavy rain during the night, and Dorak said we were to keep in a southwesterly direction, which meant following tracks now sticky with mud, where it was almost impossible not to leave footprints. Gorky was fast, so there was no time to make a detour through the woods and thrusting under low branches, when every leaf was weighted with water drops, always left a trail easy to follow. I put my moccasins in my belt, for it's easier to run barefoot on slippery ground. It was cold when I started, but when it began to rain, I was glad not to be wearing a tunic, which would soon have gotten sodden and heavy. The rain grew thicker, and I hoped that it would obliterate any tracks I left. Streams, which at this season were usually only a trickle amongst the stone, were in full spate, and I had to struggle across two of them with water up to my waist. In case Gorky hadn't yet lost me, I waded up the third stream and climbed a fall where the water arched out from an overhanging rock. Between me and the grey sky there was a curtain of water that hid the mouth of a small cave which Raki and I had found 3 years earlier. It was a wonderful place to hide in, though very wet, and until I began to shiver with cold, I considered staying there for the rest of the day. When I was higher up the hillside, the rain stopped abruptly. Though the air was alive with the sound of water dripping from trees. The sun came out. I wanted to sing with a good warmth, and should have done so if I had forgotten Gorky. I climbed a tree from which I could gain a clear view of the lower slopes. There was no sign of him, and I wished to amuse myself. Bird calls, so he wouldn't realize it was me, even if he heard them. I found a wide branch on which I could lie almost full length. The sun was so hot that the wet bark began to steam. I pulled off my forehead thong and spread out my hair to dry. When it had frozen last winter, the ice had chafed my shoulders till they bled, and I had almost envied Raki his woman's plates. The branch was so comfortable that I nearly went to sleep, and only saved myself from falling by gripping with my knees. The ground suddenly looked a long way down, although it was only the height of 15 men. I was glad that heights did not make me giddy, for several of the boys found it difficult to stand on the ledge of a cliff, holding their ankles and looking down the sheer drop. Then I remembered that Piyanah used to hate climbing down cliffs. She had expected sympathy from Raki and always got it, but the new Piyanah never felt sympathy when she saw weakness. She was delighted as a hungry man who realizes that those who share the cooking pot are too weary to eat. I was separated from Raki until I was ready to share the headdress with him, and I was getting less worthy of it every day. This was a very unpleasant thought, and I couldn't hide from it. I was learning endurance, learning to live as a boy and to beat them at the things they were taught. Even in the wrestling, I had thrown Keki and twisted his arm so badly that he couldn't use a bow for half a moon. It had given me a warm satisfaction of which now I was suddenly ashamed. I looked at the boys as my enemies, and yet from them must come our new tribe. I was preparing myself to be a chief like my father and my grandfather, honored for endurance and impassivity. But Raki and I had agreed that a chief should be chosen because his people loved him. I had done everything I could to get myself envied and disliked. Every jeer and slight I had carefully hoarded to be returned with the arrow sharpened, and I hoped from a stronger bow. Already Raki had made Rakina happier, fixed her from pain and many of her fears, and there were 5 others with whom he could talk of the laws we would make in the future. But I had made no friends, though I had gained a small measure of grudging respect. Takina had tried to be kind, but I thought that to accept his help would be to acknowledge weakness, and now he seldom spoke to me. I had known Keki was ashamed because he grew dizzy on high branches, but instead of being sympathetic, and if I had tried, how easy would it have been, for I well know the horrible queasy feeling in the pit of the belly. I had dared him in front of the others to climb higher than I, and rejoiced when I saw the sweat bead on his forehead, and knew that his hands were so slippery that he had to cling on while the rough bark scraped the skin of his wrists and fingers. I had lost in understanding, and what had I gained? I could run further without getting tired. The soles of my feet were hard enough to cross sharp gravel and rough ice without doing more than once bleed. I could swim in the river when the pack ice had only just cleared and keep my teeth from shattering. I could make the tribal marks on the calf of my leg with a glowing stick and then rub salt into the blisters without flinching, salt stolen from the place of the cooking pots to show that I could dare the penalties of a thief. What had the year brought me? Thick skin on my feet, stronger jaw muscles, the scars of several burns, and the recognition that I had worked hard to change man's contempt to a bitter hatred. Instead of helping Raki to build a bridge over the canyon, I had cut away my edge of the cliff and made it wider. My jeers at myself were louder than any Piyanah had heard. Clever Piyanah, brave, wise, impassive Piyanah, so proud with feathers. I listened and wept. I had made everything much more difficult for myself, but perhaps I could go back to the beginning and start again. If I told Keki that I often felt dizzy, it might help. I wished I had not thought about Keki before I got down to the ground, swinging by my hand and then dropping to a lower branch was suddenly unpleasant. So unpleasant that I had to cling to the trunk until the tree felt steady. I had decided to try to find Gorky, and then give him a chance of picking up my trail. Poor Gorky, he might have been quite nice if only I had not been so determinedly hurried. I saw him coming up the slope. He didn't seem to be taking any trouble to conceal his movements, so I suppose he had lost all hope of finding me. I fell flat behind a boulder, more from habit than any real wish to hide. I thought a bird call would be too obvious a way of helping him, so I dislodged a stone and made it roll down the hill. I knew he heard it, for he dodged behind a tree. It was no longer important to escape from Gorky, only an interesting game. Perhaps if I stopped minding about everything, training with the boys might be quite enjoyable. But of course, I should never stop minding about being separated from Raki. I crawled across an open space and noticed that the gravel felt unusually sharp before I reached a spinney of slides and a white birch. The small trees grew so close that it was impossible to pass between them without breaking off twigs, which I knew would betray me. I broke several and did not even bother to avoid stepping on dead sticks. I reached a plot of turf surrounded by brambles and realized the reason I wanted to stay there. Not because it was a clever hiding place, or I was getting tired. I wanted to talk to Gorky. That Gorky was the kind of person whom Raki and I would want to talk to had never occurred to me before. Perhaps a friendly tree spirit had spoken to him too, for when he saw me, instead of leaping to claim me for his quarry, he pretended to be surprised. "Oh, you are here. If you don't want to go back until later, I can tell Dorak I didn't come up with you until just before sunset." He paused and then added abruptly, "Do you want me to go away?" Yesterday I should have said that I could not have the smallest effect on me whether he went or not, or stayed. "Please don't go, Gorky, unless you want to, I mean." Gorky broke off a branch and began to slice the bark away. The silence was so solid that he might just as well have carved it instead of a stick to conceal our embarrassment. I felt as though I were hesitating before a dive, and then plunged into a spate of words. "Gorky, I've been thinking, and it wasn't at all a pleasure thought. I deliberately tried to be horrid, so horrid as I could. Until I left Raki, I had never been mocked, and it made me angry and bitter and small. I wanted to prove that girls could be the equal of men if only they had the chance, and I have done everything to make you all hate me." "I don't hate you," said Gorky. I was so moved that I was glad I had done my crying for the year earlier in the day. Otherwise, I might have started in front of him. "I'm very grateful, Gorky, I really am. I have done so many things to make you hate me, and to Keki, Parakechi, and Tekini too. I thought you were all jeering at me, so I never stopped looking for things to jeer at in you. I even asked the tree spirit to help me. I was glad when Keki was dizzy, glad when Parakechi broke his leg, glad when your canoe overturned and you were nearly drowned. Horribly, disgustingly glad, so it's very kind of you to say you don't hate me, for of course you must." "But we don't, Piyanah. We wanted to at first, because we were insulted to have to work with a girl. But when we saw that you were brave and clever at our kind of things, we tried to be friendly and you wouldn't let us." "I know I wouldn't. That's why I'm trying to explain." "Now that you've understood, you'll find it's much easier," said Gorky warmly. "When Tekini offered to lend you his moccasins the day you cut your foot on the ice, he ought to have explained that he didn't make the offer because you were a girl, but because you were one of us. I'm not really one of you. I mind things and you don't. We have to pretend not to mind in front of Dorok and some of the older boys. But amongst ourselves we can admit that we dislike being hurt. But you would never admit it, Piyanah, so whenever you were there, we had to pretend to enjoy being uncomfortable." But you all try so desperately hard in everything. Of course we do, when you're waiting to mock the lover, the loser. And you're always so serious, Piyanah. If we play a joke on anyone, you look scornful and walk away. You'd be scornful of jokes too, Gorky, I said hotly, if it was always your blanket that was full of nettles, or your food bowl that had been rubbed with gall so that you couldn't eat your meal, or your tunic that had been smeared with honey to attract fire ants, or your bowstring that had been cut nearly in half so that it snapped with the first arrow, or your canoe that leaked. If only you had laughed, or even got angry, or played the same tricks back to us, or even wept, we would have stopped. But when you sneered and pretended we were idiot children, of course we tried to think of something still more annoying. You never asked me to share in the interesting things. I even had to find an excuse not to go to the last tribal feast, because I was ashamed of sitting alone. I didn't want Raki to know that no one would talk to me. He patted me awkwardly on the shoulder. I'm sorry, Piyanah. It must have been terribly lonely for you. But can't it be different now? I gulped and hoped that Gorky thought I had swallowed a fly instead of a sob. I should so like it to be different. It's supposed to be a secret, but Raki and I are trying to learn how to teach men and women not to hate each other. And I've been such a fool that because of me, men will help the woman they take into the woods, and then the women will hate them, and the canyon of the separation will get still wider. I shan't hate my squaw because of you, Piyanah. I shall remember that she's better than me at diving, better at tracking, and that she got 7 arrows in the target yesterday while I got only 5. And I shall remember that a cut on her front hurts her just as much as it would hurt me, though she's too proud to admit to pain. When I have a squaw, I shall never let her go back to the women if she wants to stay with me. She shall be my equal in all things, and I shall only be proud when she speaks my name, and I shall honor her with a scarlet feather. Oh, Gorky, dear Gorky, then I haven't entirely failed. You haven't failed, Piyanah. Perhaps one day in the woods you will understand how much you have won. He put his arms around me as Raki might have done. This is not the wound in which I can tell you. It is nearly sunset. This is not the wood in which I can tell you. It is nearly sunset, and I must take my quarry back to Dorak. Then we walked down the hillside. Even the shadows were friendly, and the evening star did not speak of loneliness. So it's getting dark, and this is the end of this chapter. The Quarry. Have a good Sunday evening. Bye-bye.